History buffs, listen up. Welcome to a trip back in time to 1924. Back then, cities were full of life and the streets were packed with people. The world was recovering from World War I and everyone felt hopeful about the future. There were parties in the streets and newspapers were filled with stories about progress and new inventions. This positive feeling showed up in the amazing designs of the time, especially in the fancy villas and mansions. These buildings showed off good taste and incredible luxury. These buildings were a symbol of the dreams of the people who built them. Every little detail showed a special architectural style. Today we're going to look at the prices and designs of these villas and mansions from 1924. We'll see how busy the real estate market was. We'll look closely at the buildings, checking out how they were made, what materials they used, and the stories they tell. We'll learn how the building methods and materials showed the quality and cleverness of that time. Come with us as we travel back in time and explore the awesome world of the fanciest homes of 1924. Stick around until the end to learn some surprising facts and secrets you won't want to miss. We'll relive moments from history and enjoy how beautiful that time was. And back in 1924, having a villa was a really big deal. It meant you were wealthy and important. These fancy houses showed how the rich folks lived with their awesome designs and tons of space. They weren't just regular homes. They were like trophies that showed everyone how successful and comfortable you were. They weren't just places to live. They were like big announcements. A lot of times they were huge properties with gardens, fountains, and everything you needed for a comfy and luxurious life. These villas had beautiful gardens and pretty fountains all around them, which made their everyday lives seem even more magical and beautiful. But how much did all this fancy living cost back then? Well, the price of a villa really depended on where it was, how big it was, and how fancy it was. The average price of a villa in 1924 could be really different depending on the location, size, and, of course, how luxurious it was. In some places, fancy villas cost a ton of money, while in other areas, the prices weren't so high. You might be surprised to hear that you could get a big villa in a nice neighborhood for what seems like a pretty small amount of money today. Prices ranged from a few $1,000s to tens of thousands of dollars. That would be like a few $100,000 in today's money. These villas were a big investment back then, but they were also a way to show off your success and enjoy a luxurious life. The villas of 1924 weren't just pricey, they were also built during a special time for architecture. Art Deco was becoming fashionable, and you can see its influence in the geometric shapes and bold, simple designs that would soon be everywhere. Many villas from this time also used parts of older styles like neoclassical or Art Nouveau, making a neat blend of old and new. Big balconies, often decorated with fancy ironwork, were common. They were perfect for enjoying the outdoors in comfort and style. Chapter 3. If villas meant you were rich, palaces were a whole different level, only for the top of society like royalty and super-rich business owners. A palace like this in 1924 could cost a fortune, millions of dollars in today's money. These weren't just houses, they were huge properties, with the main building, big fancy gardens, and sometimes even their own private lakes or forests. It was like its own little world, full of luxury and magnificence. Chapter 4. Palace designs in 1924 were absolutely incredible. These palaces showed off luxury and riches everywhere you looked. From small details in the decorations to big architectural choices, every part of these palaces told a story of elegance and luxury. Grand staircases, high ceilings, and fancy chandeliers were a must-have. These things made anyone who stepped inside a palace feel amazed. Sparkling chandeliers lit up the huge halls, and grand staircases connected the different floors in a really stylish way. People picked out materials very carefully. From the best marble to exotic woods, they spared no expense to make the palaces feel elegant and timeless. Shiny marble floors reflected the light beautifully, and fancy wooden furniture made things feel warm and cozy. Palaces often mixed different kinds of architecture, showing off what the owners liked and what they dreamed of. These styles went from classical to modern, creating a unique mix of beauty and variety. Some people liked a more classical look with pillars, columns, and statues that looked like they came straight from ancient Greece or Rome. These things made the palaces feel grand and historic, like they were a part of ancient history. Others liked more modern styles. They used Art Deco or even some early modern designs. These things made the palaces feel fresh and new, like they were ahead of their time. Chapter 5. Looking at the prices and designs of villas and palaces from 1924 and comparing them to today's shows some really interesting changes. While the architectural styles of the past still give us ideas, what people like today is different. We often like things simpler, with more open spaces. What folks thought was super fancy back in 1924 might seem a little stuffy or even small to us now. But those big old buildings still have something special about them. They give us a peek into the past, a time when people really cared about making things beautiful and detailed. Gap 3S. As we go from the fancy houses of 1924 to the years after, we can see how villa designs changed because of different ways of living and what was popular at the time. In the 1930s, Art Deco became really popular. It had big, bold shapes and lots of fancy decorations. It was very different from the older house designs. After World War II in the 1950s, everyone felt hopeful. That's when mid-century modern houses became popular. These houses had simple lines, big windows, and brought the outdoors in. People wanted houses that were easy to live in and not too fancy. Everyone was excited for new and better things. In the 1980s, houses were all kinds of different styles. Sometimes they mixed old and new designs. People really liked having a house that was just right for them. Houses from this time often had big open rooms, tall ceilings, and used things like wood and plastic together. People liked to try new things and make their houses special. Today, houses keep changing. They're built to be good for the planet and use smart technology. Modern villas don't use a lot of energy. They're built with materials that are good for the earth, and they have automatic things that make them easy and comfy to live in. Simple designs are really popular right now. People like big open rooms, lots of sunlight, and feeling close to nature. Looking back at all these different times shows us how houses have changed to fit what people need and want. Every time period added something special to how houses look, and that's why we think they were so cool today. Gap 3S. Come with us as we keep looking at amazing buildings. Every building has a story to tell about the time it was built. Gap 3S. Welcome everyone! Today we'll explore the amazing buildings of 1924 and discover the exciting stories that make these villas and palaces so interesting. One of the most interesting stories is about Villa La Roche, which the famous architect Le Corbusier designed for his parents. Located on the shores of Lake Geneva, it was a perfect example of modern living. It focused on being simple and useful. Even though it was small, it became a symbol of the modernist movement and showed how buildings could blend in with nature. Next, we have the story of Villa Tugendhat in Brno, Czech Republic. Designed by architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, it was considered a perfect example of modern architecture. It had an open floor plan, which was a brand new idea back then. And the onyx wall in the living room, which changes color with the sunlight, is still one of its most beautiful features. This villa wasn't just a fancy home, it was also important to the political history of the area. In Italy, Villa Necchi Campiglio in Milan is a great example of luxury and new ideas. Built for the Necchi family, it was one of the first houses in Milan to have an indoor pool and air conditioning. The villa's design shows the family's importance and the new technology of the time. It's a great mix of old and new. Gap 3S. These and other stories really show us what 1924 was like. It was a time when architecture was amazing and every villa and palace had a special story. Join us as we continue to explore these beautiful and important buildings. Gap 3S. And now let's move on to our final chapter. Gap 3S. We're continuing our journey from the villas of 1924, but this time we're going way back in time. In this chapter, we'll show you some of the oldest palaces in history, focusing on their architecture, their historical importance, and some amazing stories about them. Gap 3S. Our first stop is the Palace of Knossos on the island of Crete in Greece. Built around 1900 BC, this ancient Minoan palace is considered a marvel of early architecture. The palace is known for its sprawling design, grand staircases, and beautiful murals depicting scenes from Minoan life and mythology. Legend says this palace was the home of the mythical king Minos and the Minotaur, a creature that lived in a labyrinth beneath the palace. Gap 3S. Next we travel to Egypt. to explore the majestic Karnak temple in Luxor. While not a palace in the traditional sense, this massive complex was an important religious center for the ancient Egyptians. Built over 2,000 years, it features massive columns, towering obelisks, and intricate hieroglyphic carvings. The Great Hypostyle Hall, with its 134 massive columns, is a testament to the ancient Egyptians' mastery of architecture. The rest of the script follows the same pattern of translation. Gap 3ES. Let's take a moment to look at the different ways people lived in villas in 1924 and today. Back in the roaring 20s, owning a villa meant you were rich and important. Villa owners would throw big parties with jazz bands, lots of bubbly champagne, and fancy Art Deco decorations. These parties were a way to show off how exciting and over-the-top the times were. Gap 3S. Now let's jump ahead to today. The way people live in villas has changed a lot. People who own villas today want both luxury and peace and quiet. Villas are still fancy, but now owners care more about privacy, being good to the environment, and having the latest technology. They like things like smart home systems, eco-friendly designs, and private places to relax and work out, like indoor pools, home gyms, and spas. Gap 3S. Even though things are different, one thing stays the same. Villas show what their owners like and how they live. Whether it's 1924 or today, these amazing houses show what was important back then and what people hoped for. Gap 3S. Come with us as we look at how these homes, old and new, show the spirit of their time and give us a peek into the lives of the people who live in them. Gap 3S. And now let's go to our final chapter. Thanks for coming along with me on this trip back in time, a journey to a time when villas and mansions weren't just buildings, but symbols of hopes and dreams. Their beauty still stands out, showing us how buildings can capture the spirit of a time. We've traveled through history, explored the costs, the styles, and the history of these amazing places. We've seen how they reflected what life was like back in 1924, a world ready for big changes. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more cool looks into the past. Leave a comment below and tell us what you think. See you next time. Let the stories of the past inspire you. As we finish this story, remember that history isn't just a bunch of dates, but a collection of stories that shape who we are today and who we will be tomorrow. Learn from the past, and let those lessons help you build a better future.